live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
The news in details. A bill which criminalizes LGBTQ+ people in Ghana and their supporters drew international condemnation on Thursday after it was passed by Parliament, with the United Nations calling it profoundly disturbing and urging it not to become law. In a statement, Ravina Shamdasani, spokeswoman for the Office of the UN High Commissioner, said the bill broadens the scope of criminal sanctions against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people simply for being who they are, and threatens criminal penalties against those perceived as their allies. Consensual same-sex conduct should never be criminalized. The bill, if it becomes law, will be corrosive and will have a negative impact on society as a whole, she said. The bill, which was voted through by Parliament in the West African nation on Wednesday, was first introduced 3 years ago. It criminalizes relationships, sexual activity, and public displays of affection between members of the LGBTQ+ community. It also targets their supporters and the promotion and funding of LGBTQ+ related activities. Those convicted could face up to a decade in prison. The bill has been sent to the President's desk to be signed into law. Ghana has generally been considered to be more respectful of human rights than most African countries, but since the legislation passed through Parliament, international condemnation has grown. The United States said it was deeply troubled by the bill, saying it threatens Ghanaians' freedom of speech and is urging for its constitutionality to be reviewed, said State Department spokesman Matthew Miller on Wednesday. In a radio interview, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice Godfred Yeboah-Dame said he would not advise the President to sign a bill into law that didn't abide by the Constitution. Audrey Gadzekpo, chairman of the Center of Democratic Development, a rights group, said it will continue advocating to get the bill thrown out, including by going to court. LGBTQ+ people in Ghana say they are worried for the safety of those around them, such as health providers, as well as for themselves. The passage of this bill, it demonstrates to me and all Ghanaians that our politicians do not respect our democracy. They do not respect our constitution, nor do they respect the many international rights treaties that Ghana has signed onto over the years, a queer person who did not want to be named for fear of reprisal told the Associated Press. I don't know how much longer I can continue to live in a country that has criminalized me, she said. At least 24 people died off Senegal's northern coast, and many others were injured when their boat capsized, officials said, underscoring the danger of the route used by an increasing number of migrants seeking to reach Spain from West Africa. The boat was bound for Europe and capsized near the town of St. Louis, where bodies washed ashore Wednesday afternoon, and the fire department was alerted, said Alion Badara Sambe, the local governor. The injured are being treated in a hospital in St. Louis, and an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the accident has been opened, he said. The number of migrants leaving from Senegal on rickety wooden boats surged last year, and nearly 1,000 people died while trying to reach Spain by sea in the first 6 months of 2023, according to the Spanish migration advocacy group Walking Borders. Factors such as youth unemployment, political unrest, and the impact of climate change push migrants to risk their lives on overcrowded boats. Senegal has been thrown into turmoil as elections meant for February were controversially delayed by the president, sparking deadly protests. Elections have been proposed for June, but it is clear when or whether the president, whose term officially ends in April, will step down. Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema Thursday declared the country's debilitating drought a national disaster and emergency, saying it has devastated food production and electricity generation as the nation battles to recover from a recent deadly cholera outbreak. Like some of its neighbors, the southern African country is suffering a severe drought as the El Nino weather pattern worsens harsh weather conditions attributed in part to climate change. In an address to the nation, Hichilema said he has instructed security forces to focus more on food production in the largely peaceful country. He said 84 of the country's 116 districts are affected by the prolonged drought, and authorities will take food from areas where there is an excess and distribute it to needy areas. In addition, the country plans more food imports and is mobilizing United Nations agencies and local businesses to assist. The drought has destroyed about 1 million hectares of the 2.2 million hectares planted with the staple maize crop, he said. This drought has devastating consequences on many sectors such as agriculture, water availability, and energy supply, risking our national food security and the livelihoods of millions of our people. The dry spell is projected to continue even into the month of March, affecting over 1 million of our farming households, said Hichilema. Electricity generation has not been spared, with the country expecting a power deficit of about 430 megawatts, potentially reaching 520 megawatts by December, he said, as water levels decline at the country's major source of hydropower, the Kariba Dam, which it shares with neighbor Zimbabwe. To cope, the country will import electricity and also ration supplies to its approximately 20 million people, he said. Egypt has condemned the killings on Thursday in Gaza City when the territory's health officials say Israeli forces fired at a crowd of Palestinians waiting for aid, killing at least 104 people. Also, around 760 were wounded. Gaza's health ministry spokesperson Ashraf Al-Qidri said the ministry described it as a massacre. It is a heinous crime to target peaceful civilians who are rushing to get their share of humanitarian aid. Read a statement released by Egypt's foreign ministry. It is a flagrant violation of the international law and the international humanitarian law, and also shows disregard for the dignity of human lives, the Egyptian statement added. Arab nations have failed to get immediate support for a UN Security Council statement that would have blamed Israeli forces for opening fire at Palestinians waiting for the delivery of food and other humanitarian aid near Gaza City and killing over 100 people. Witnesses said Israeli troops fired on a large crowd of Palestinians racing to pull food off an aid convoy on Thursday. More than 100 people were killed in the chaos, bringing the death toll since the start of the Israel-Hamas war to over 30,000, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian UN ambassador, told reporters after an emergency closed council meeting on the killings late Thursday that 14 of the council members supported the statement put forward by Algeria, the Arab representatives on the body. The United States didn't support the statement, and U.S. Deputy Ambassador Robert Wood told a reporter who questioned why we don't have all the facts on ground that is the problem. He said, there are contradictory reports, and the U.S. is trying to gather all the facts, including on the circumstances around how people died, which is a key issue. Wood said diplomats were working to see if we can find some language that everyone can agree on, and an agreement could come Thursday night or not at all. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan's foreign ministries condemned Israel for its forces firing on a large crowd of Palestinians trying to get aid in northern Gaza, which the three Arab governments called an attack targeting civilians. The three foreign ministries, in separate statement, called for increased safe passages to deliver humanitarian aid and for the international community to take decisive actions to pressure Israel to abide by international law and to reach an agreement for an immediate ceasefire. Israeli officials have acknowledged that troops opened fire on a large crowd of Palestinians who had converged on an aid convoy as it entered northern Gaza. The officials insisted on anonymity to give details about what happened early Thursday. They said troops opened fire after the crowd approached the soldiers in a threatening way. Gaza's health ministry says 104 people were killed and 760 wounded. Palestinian witnesses told the Associated Press that troops shot at the crowd and a tank opened fire. The Israeli military said in a statement that dozens were killed and injured from pushing, trampling and being run over by the trucks. The military also circulated aerial footage showing hundreds of people crowding around trucks, saying it showed that the deaths and injuries were caused by the crowd itself. It was not clear from the footage if anyone was being trampled. The embattled UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees may have to scale down on operations at the end of March if it doesn't secure a new influx of funds, the agency's head told reporters Thursday. Some $450 million in funding for UNRWA has been frozen by donor states after Israel alleged that 12 members of the agency took part in the deadly October 7 attack in southern Israel by Hamas militants that sparked the war in Gaza. UNRWA has thousands of staff members. We have no funding visibility past March, said Felipe Lazzarini, head of the agency. He said the agency is in talks with the European Commission to secure a donation of 82 million euros, $89 million, that could temporarily alleviate its financial shortfalls. The funding cuts would impact UNRWA operations in all areas where it has a presence: Gaza, the Israeli occupied West Bank, Lebanon, Syria and Jordan. The shortfalls would result in a slow onset implosion of the agency, he said. Israeli officials have alleged that UNRWA has not done enough to push back against purported attempts by Hamas to infiltrate the agency, a claim vehemently denied by Lazzarini. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he intends to force the closure of UNRWA after the Gaza war, now in its 5th month. Israeli officials have called for the eviction of the agency from its headquarters in Jerusalem and have frozen its bank account, according to Lazzarini. 2 Israelis were killed in a Palestinian shooting attack at a gas station in the occupied West Bank on Thursday, the Israeli military said. The Israeli military said one attacker was killed after opening fire at the gas station near the Jewish line, and that Israeli forces were searching the area for additional suspects. Paramedics pronounced a 57-year-old man and another in his 20s dead at the scene, one in a vehicle and another nearby. The Megan David Adam Medical Agency said in a statement it said a civilian shot and killed the attacker. The Israeli families of hostages held by Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip and their supporters are launching a 4-day march from southern Israel to Jerusalem to demand their loved ones be set free. The march comes as negotiations are underway in Qatar to bring about a deal between Hamas and Israel that would lead to a ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. President Joe Biden has said such a deal was at hand, but officials from Israel and Hamas have expressed skepticism about it. Negotiators from the United States, Egypt and Qatar have been working on a framework deal under which Hamas would free some of the dozens of hostages it holds in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners and a 6-week halt in fighting. During the temporary pause, negotiations will continue over the release of the remaining hostages. Hostages freed in a late November deal, some of whom still have relatives held in Gaza, joined the march on Wednesday. It will end near the official residence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later this week. In its October 7 attack, Hamas abducted roughly 250 people, according to Israeli authorities, including men, women, children, and older adults. Roughly 100 were freed about 50 days into their captivity. Some 130 hostages remain in Israel, says about a quarter of them are dead. The plight of the hostages has deeply shaken Israelis, who see in them as an enduring symbol of the state's failure to protect its citizens from assault. As South Korea's government has made at least a last plea for junior doctors to end their walkout hours before a Thursday deadline, many were expected to defy orders to return to work, risking suspensions of medical licenses and prosecution. Thousands of medical interns and residents have been on strike for about 10 days to protest the government's push to boost medical school enrollments. Government officials have warned that strikers would face legal repercussions if they don't return to their hospitals by Thursday. As of Wednesday night, about 9,076 of the country's 13,000 medical interns and residents are confirmed to have left their hospitals after submitting resignations, according to the Health Ministry. It said 294 strikers had returned to work. There was no word on any others going back to their jobs as of 10 p.m. Thursday. Observers say many strikers are likely to defy the deadline, continuing the work boycott for weeks or months. The government is expected to begin formal steps towards penalties on Monday, as Friday is a national holiday. We've said that we won't hold them responsible for leaving their work sites if they return by today, Vice Health Minister Park Min-soo told a briefing. Doctors are there to serve patients, and those patients are anxiously waiting for you. This isn't the way to protest against the government. Later Thursday, Park met some striking doctors for more than 3 hours, but there were no reports of a breakthrough. Officials invited 94 representatives of the strikers to the meeting, but Park said less than 10 showed up and they were ordinary strikers, not leaders. Park said they asked him about the government recruitment plan and he called for them to end their walkouts. India on Thursday said it has begun replacing dozens of its military personnel in Maldives with civilian technical staff who will operate 3 aircrafts given by India to provide humanitarian services. The first batch of technicians to operate a helicopter has reached Maldives. Indian External Affairs Ministry spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal said. The decision comes after new Maldives President Mohamed Muizzu demanded that the Indian military personnel be withdrawn by March 15th. At least 75 Indian military personnel are believed to be in Maldives. Their known activities include transporting patients from remote islands and rescuing people at sea. India earlier gave Maldives a Dornier airplane and 2 helicopters. Tensions between India and Maldives have grown since pro-China Muizzu came to power last year. The Maldives Foreign Ministry said last month that officials from the 2 countries had arranged that India would complete the withdrawal of its troops by May 10th. After taking office, Muizzu visited China ahead of India and said Maldives' small size is not a license for anyone to bully it. His comments were an apparent response to calls on social media in India for tourists to boycott Maldives after 3 Maldives deputy ministers made derogatory posts about Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The dispute began in January when Modi posted pictures on X, formerly known as Twitter, of himself strolling on the beach and snorkeling in Lakshadweep, an Indian archipelago that his government believes has untapped tourism potential. Some in Maldives saw it as an attempt to lure tourists away from its sandy white beaches and luxury island resorts. Muizzu suspended the deputy ministers, saying their comments did not reflect government policy. However, Muizzu announced plans after returning from China to end Maldives' dependence on India and find alternate places for Maldivians to obtain education and health services and imports food and medicine. Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed Thursday to fulfill Moscow's goals in Ukraine and sternly warned the West against deeper involvement in the fighting, saying that such a move is fraught with the risk of a global nuclear conflict. Putin's blunt warning came in a State of the Nation address ahead of next month's elections. He is all but certain to win, underlining his readiness to raise the stakes in the tug-of-war with the West to protect the Russian gains in Ukraine, in an apparent reference to French President Emmanuel Macron's statement earlier this week that the future deployment of Western ground troops to Ukraine should not be ruled out. Putin warned that it would lead to tragic consequences for the countries who decide to do that. Putin noted that while accusing Russia of plans to attack NATO allies in Europe, Western allies were selecting targets for striking our territory and talking about the possibility of sending a NATO contingent to Ukraine. We remember the fate of those who sent their troop contingents to the territory of our country, the Russian leader said in an apparent allusion to the failed invasions by Napoleon and Hitler. Now the consequences for the potential invaders will be far more tragic. In a 2-hour speech before an audience of lawmakers and top officials, Putin cast Western leaders as reckless and irresponsible and declared that the West should keep in mind that we also have the weapons that can strike targets on their territory, and what they are now suggesting and scaring the world with, all that raises the real threat of a nuclear conflict that will mean the destruction of our civilization. The strong statement followed earlier warnings from Putin, who has issued frequent reminders of Russia's nuclear might since he sent troops into Ukraine in February 2022 as he sought to discourage the West from expanding its military support for Kyiv. Putin emphasized that Russia's nuclear forces are in full readiness, saying that the military has deployed potent new weapons, some of them tested on the battlefield in Ukraine. Relatives and supporters of Alexei Navalny are bidding farewell to the opposition leader at a funeral in southeastern Moscow following a battle with authorities over the release of his body after his still explained death in an Auschwitz penal colony. His supporters say several churches in Moscow refused to hold the service before Navalny's team got permission from one in the capital's Marino district, where he once lived before his 2020 poisoning treatment in Germany and subsequent arrest on his return to Russia. The charge of the icon of the Mother of God suits My Sorrows, which agreed to hold the service, did not mention it on a social media page. Police on Thursday were seen putting crowd control barriers at the church. Burial was to follow in the nearby Borisovskoye cemetery, where police also were seen Thursday. His mother, Lyudmila Navalny, spent 8 days trying to get authorities to release the body following his February 16th death at penal colony number 3 in the town of Kop in the Yamalo-Nenets region, about 1,900 kilometers northeast of Moscow. Authorities originally said they couldn't turn over the body because they needed to conduct post-mortem tests. Navalny, 69, made a video appeal to President Vladimir Putin to release the body so she can bury her son with dignity. Once it was released, at least one funeral director said he had been forbidden to work with Navalny supporters. The spokeswoman for Navalny's team, Kira Yamsh, said on social media. They were also unable to find a hearse for the funeral. Unknown people are calling up people and threatening them not to take Alexei's body anywhere, Yamsh said Thursday. Russian authorities haven't announced the cause of death for Navalny, 47, who crusaded against official corruption and organized his big protests as Putin's fiercest political foe. Many Western leaders blamed the death on the Russian leader, which the Kremlin rejected. It was not immediately clear who among Navalny's family or allies would attend the funeral, with many of his associates in exile due to fear of prosecution in Russia. Navalny's Foundation for Fighting Corruption and his regional offices were designated as extremist organizations by the Russian government in 2021. The politician's team said the funeral would be streamed live on Navalny's YouTube channel. Germany will increase its humanitarian aid for Gaza by 20 million euros, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said Thursday night. She called on Israel to immediately allow more aid into Gaza and make sure that aid can also be distributed. Baerbock added that if not enough aid was able to get into Gaza by trucks, Germany would cooperate with Jordan to airlift aid into Gaza. A statement didn't specify the total amount of aid Germany has promised for Gaza. The website of the German Foreign Office says it has given 138 million euros of humanitarian aid since October 7th to the Palestinian territories, which would include aid for the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The European Union took a major step Thursday in ending its standoff with member state Poland, saying it would start releasing billions of euros that were frozen over what the bloc said were the previous Polish government's backsliding on democratic principles. The move is an important reward for Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who has sought relentlessly since taking office in December to overturn measures enacted by the previous Conservative government. Beyond its political significance, it opens the way for up to 135 billion euros in EU aid to go to Poland over the coming few years. The decision cements a sea change in relations. Both sides had openly clashed after the stridently nationalist Law and Justice Party came to power in 2015 and implemented reforms. That crisis had placed Poland's judiciary under political control. The EU threatened to suspend Poland's EU voting rights and also blocked its access to EU funds. Today is a landmark day for Poland, said EU Commission Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis. Thanks to its efforts to restore the rule of law, we are now able to unlock access to a slew of funds that help EU nations recover from the COVID-19 crisis and help their economies rise to the standards of wealthier member nations. Under complicated EU bookkeeping rules, Poland could receive over the next weeks the first 600 million euros in real cash from a 75 billion euro aid pot that had been blocked. More funds will be transferred once Poland sends in outstanding paperwork from projects. a 6.3 billion euro disbursement from a 60 billion euro program to boost the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic downturn should also be released soon. In Warsaw, Deputy Foreign Minister Andrzej Zejna said the release of the funds means that Tusk had won back the EU's confidence in Poland. Today's news is very important for us. It is the result of the effort taken by the current government, which tries to be effective, Zejna said. Zejna said the availability of the funds will have an impact on the economy through investment and may contribute to reducing Poland's unemployment rate, currently at 5.4%. Tusk's election victory last October was essential in achieving the change. The Commission has now acknowledged that sufficient efforts to resolve the issues have been made for it to start releasing the funds. If there is no full follow-through by Poland, restrictive measures could be reimposed. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We return after this break.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring all sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
Every day our lives are changed by history.
We are one people, all of us.
Leaders, politics,
Nobody's ambition is what's the blood.
I have fought very firmly.
natural occurrence, war, and the world economy.
I belong to everybody and I belong to nobody.
ATN covers it all on ATN Politics today.
People into the country illegally. That is amazing.
Honorable
You human trafficker.
Honorable They are not picking our calls.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring all sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories around the globe. Fact on ATN.
Welcome back. This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. The chairman of the Senate's Armed Services Committee has asked President Joe Biden to deploy a military hospital ship and support units to treat Gaza's wounded and help establish a sea route for delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Chairman Jack Reed, a Rhode Island Democrat, made the request in a letter to the White House Wednesday night. Senator Angus King, a political independent from Maine and another senior member of the Armed Services Committee, joined in the request. Despite U.S. appeals to Israel, Gaza residents trapped in the conflict between Israel and Hamas continue to suffer without adequate medical care, food, and other aid, the senators said. Consequently, we urge you to take additional steps to deliver humanitarian aid by deploying a U.S. Navy hospital ship and support elements to the region, and by working with the Israeli and Egyptian governments to establish maritime logistic routes and ensure civilian access to aid, the senators wrote. The two acknowledged the risk but said the U.S. military was best equipped to handle them. The deployment would bring immense capacity to bear off the coast of the Gaza Strip. They wrote to the White House it would be a visible embodiment of America's commitment to the humanitarian challenges of the region. The U.S. has two dedicated hospital ships, the USNS Mercy and USNS Comfort. Each has a suite of advanced medical facilities, including scores of intensive care unit beds, blood banks, and operating rooms. President Joe Biden has said Thursday that a deal to pause fighting between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and release some hostages held by the militant group would probably not be done by Monday. His comments at the White House came days after he said he hoped to have an agreement in place by the end of the upcoming week. Hope strings eternal, Biden told reporters on the South Lawn before departing for Texas, where he is to visit the U.S.-Mexico border. I was on the telephone with people from the region, probably not by Monday, but I'm hopeful. The White House later said the president had spoken by phone Thursday with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. The calls focused on the war in Gaza and ceasefire negotiations, as well as plans to get more humanitarian aid into the besieged territory. Biden and the two leaders emphasized in their calls how the release of hostages would result in an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza over a period of at least 6 weeks, a White House statement said. Biden also said the U.S. was still trying to determine what happened in Gaza City on Thursday, where witnesses say Israeli troops fired on a large crowd of Palestinians racing to pull off food off an aid convoy. Biden said the loss of life would complicate ongoing talks to free hostages and pause fighting between Israel and Hamas. We are checking it out right now, Biden told reporters. There's two competing versions of what happened. I don't have an answer yet. A federal judge on Thursday blocked a new Texas law that would give police broad powers to arrest migrants suspected of illegally entering the U.S., dealing a victory to the Biden administration with a broad rejection of Republican Governor Greg Abbott's immigration enforcement efforts. U.S. District Judge David Ezra's preliminary injunction pausing a law that was set to take effect March 5th came as President Joe Biden and his likely Republican challenger in November, Donald Trump, were visiting Texas' southern border to discuss immigration. The state attorney general's office immediately appealed the ruling, according to a statement Thursday. The ruling rebuked Texas immigration enforcement effort on multiple fronts, brushing off claims by Republicans about an ongoing invasion along the southern border due to a record high illegal crossings. Ezra also said the law violates the Constitution's supremacy clause, conflicts with federal immigration law, and would hamper U.S. foreign relations and treaty obligations. It is the second time in 6 months that Ezra has stopped one of Abbott's border escalations, having also ruled against a floating barrier Texas erected in the Rio Grande, allowing Texas to permanently supersede federal directives due to a so-called invasion would amount to a nullification of federal law and authority, a notion that is antithetical to the Constitution and has been unequivocally rejected by federal courts since the Civil War, the judge wrote. Opponents have called the Texas measure the most dramatic attempt by a state to police immigration since the 2010 Arizona law that opponents derided as the Show Me Your Papers bill. The U.S. Supreme Court partially struck down the Arizona law, but some Texas Republicans want the ruling to get a second look. A panel of UN-backed human rights experts on Thursday accused Nicaragua's government of systematic human rights abuses tantamount to crimes against humanity, implicating a range of high-ranking officials in the government of President Daniel Ortega. The allegations follow an investigation into the country's expanding crackdown on political dissent. The Ortega government has gone after opponents for years, but it hit a turning point with mass protests against the government in 2018 that resulted in violent repression by authorities. In the past year, repression has expanded to large swaths of society with the focus of incapacitating any kind of opposition in the long term, according to the independent group of UN experts investigating the issue since March 2022. The experts do not speak for the world body but work under a mandate from the Human Rights Council. Serious systematic human rights violation tantamount to crimes against humanity continue to be perpetrated by the Nicaraguan government for political reasons, the group said in a statement. Jan Simon, an expert who headed the investigation, said at a news conference Thursday in Geneva that the Nicaraguan government's persecution targets all forms of opposition, whether real or perceived, both domestically and abroad. The state has targeted civilians, including university students, indigenous and black Nicaraguans, and members of the Catholic Church. Children and family members are now targeted simply for being related to people who raise their voices against the government. Ortega's government has repeatedly said that the mass demonstrations against it in 2018 constituted a failed coup attempt orchestrated by the United States and typically defends any repression as a crackdown on anti-government plots. The government did not immediately respond to emailed requests for comment on the report Thursday. The flow of thousands of migrants daily through the treacherous migratory highway, the Darien Gap, has been cut off following the capture of a member of boat captains who had been ferrying the migrants to the starting point of their jungle trek. The stoppage began when Colombian law enforcement captured 2 boat captains in the northern city of Nicole. On Monday, the companies that employed them halted all transport services in protest, effectively cutting off the officially estimated 2,000 people a day that enter the jungle passage hoping to reach the United States. It has led to a build-up of as many as 8,000 people waiting to cross between Colombia and Panama. The Colombia's Ombudsman Office confirmed Thursday. The office, a governmental human rights watchdog, has warned that the build-up could overwhelm the health system, food supply, among other things. We can't wait until things collapse and it ends in a violation of human rights already vulnerable migrants' populations, said Carlos Camargo, assists the head of the office. The chaos has once again underscored the long road ahead for officials in Latin America and the United States as they struggle to take on records of migration and unravel the increasingly lucrative migrant trafficking industry. President Joe Biden has pressured Colombia and other Latin American nations to crack down on regional migration headed to the U.S. southern border. While many Latin American countries have boosted enforcement, the jungles of the Darien Gap have remained a lawless swath of the migratory route north, largely controlled by Colombia's most powerful drug gang, the Gulf Clan. Last year, more than 500,000 people crossed the Darien Gap, many traveling from Venezuela and other Latin American, African, and Asian countries. From there, migrants wind up through Central America and Mexico and land on the U.S.-Mexico border, where authorities came across migrants 2.5 million times in 2023. The unprecedented influx of people has returned to the spotlight in the lead-up to the November 2024, and both Biden and former President Donald Trump plan to pay visits to the border on Friday. Heavy gunfire paralyzed Haiti's capital Thursday, and at least 4 police officers were slain as a powerful gang leader announced that he would try to capture the country's police chief and government ministers. The move came during the absence of Prime Minister Ariel Henry, who is in Kenya trying to finalize details for the deployment of a foreign armed force to Haiti to help combat gangs. Gunmen shot at Haiti's main international airport and other targets, including police stations, in a wave of violence that caught many people by surprise. At least 4 police officers, including 2 women, were killed in an attack on a station near the community of Canaan, according to a police union. The violence forced the airport, businesses, government agencies, and schools to close as parents and young children fled through the streets in panic. At least one airline, Sunrise Airways, suspended all flights. Jimmy Cherizier, known as Barbecue and leader of the gang federation G9 Family and Allies, was seen in a recorded video announcing that the aim was to tie up the police chief and government ministers and prevent Henry from returning to Haiti. With our guns and with the Haitian people, we will free the country, he said. A spokesman for the Prime Minister's office could not be immediately reached for comment. The head of Haiti's National Police, Franz Elbe, and police spokesman Gary The Rosiers did not return messages for comments. Gunfire still rang out Thursday evening, and dozens of Haitians were seen carrying children and heavy bags stuffed with belongings, fleeing their neighborhoods. They raised their hands as a peace offering to potential gangs while rushing through intersections. Tour booking agents and managers of a New Zealand island where volcanic eruption killed 22 people in 2019 were ordered Friday to pay nearly $30 million in fines and reparations. The holding company of the island owners, a boat tour operator, and 3 companies that operated helicopter tours had been found guilty of safety breaches at a 3-month trial last year. White Island, the tip of an undersea volcano also known by its indigenous Maori name, Wakari, was a popular tourist destination before the eruption. There were 47 tourists and tour guides on the island when the superheated steam erupted on December 9, 2019, killing some people instantly and leaving survivors with agonizing burns. There is no way to measure the emotional harm survivors and affected families have endured and will continue to endure, Judge Evangelist Thomas said during the sentencing in an Auckland court. Reparation in a case like this can be no more than token recognition of that harm. No review of prevailing reparation levels conducted by any other court contemplates emotional harm of the scale and nature that is present in this case. Greater awards are appropriate. Previously, a 3-month judge only trial against 13 groups had seen 6 plead guilty and other 6 having charges against them dismissed. The charges were brought by regulators and carried fines as a maximum penalty. The final remaining defendant in the trial was Wakari Management Limited, which was found guilty on 1 charge in October last year. At Friday's sentencing hearing, Thomas was particularly scathing towards the shareholders of WML, the holding company for the island owners, Andrew, James and Peter Buttle, who he said had appeared to have profited handsomely from tours to the island, despite the company claiming no assets for a bank account to hold funds. While conceding he could not make orders against the individual owners, he said the ruling did not relieve WML from its $636,000 fine or its shares of the reparations for the victims and their families of $2.97 million. This case, like many others, sadly reveals how simply corporate structures can be used to thwart meaningful responses to safety breaches. Judge Thomas said, "There may be no commercial basis for doing so, but many would argue there is an inescapable moral one. We wait to see what the bottles do. The world is watching." The specific reparation sums awarded to victims and the families of those who died was suppressed for publication by the court. The last remaining defendant, New Zealand Scientific Agency, GNS Science, the government agency that monitors volcanic activity, was fined $33,000 for failing to have processes to share risk assessments with its contracted helicopter pilots. No GNS staff were on the island at the time of the eruption, and the agency was not ordered to make any reparations. And that is the international news for today. Before we go, another look at the major stories. From Senegal, 24 people die after boat capsizes. From Gaza, Arab nations fail in attempt to blame Israel. From South Korea, government makes last appeal for doctors to end strike. From Russia, Putin warns West to keep off Ukraine. From United States, senators ask Biden to send hospital ship to Gaza. From New Zealand, tour agents manages to pay for reparations for volcanic eruption. I am Valentina Lawrence. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on all our social media platforms: on X, Atlantic TV Net, Facebook and YouTube, Atlantic Television Network, Instagram, Atlantic TV Network, or you can watch us live on our website, atlanticnetwork.tv. Do remember that peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Good afternoon. Have a lovely day.